time, weather, and always
And welcome back to WASMR. This is a presentation of Siren Calls Saturday Night. I'm your host, DJ Double L. Yes, the Tallahassee Lassie herself, bringing you a musical dose of everyone's two favorite T's, trivia and tinkles. Before I tackle the questions sent in by our listeners this evening, let's take a drive downtown and visit everyone's favorite fabricated sponsor, the Wordplay Diner. Located downtown on the corner of 5th and Main, their classic rock menu is sure to get your day going with a wide selection of breakfast favorites. Like my personal favorite, everything bagel with lox, or as the staff like to call it, the salmon and garfunkel. Check out their latest menu addition, the Rolling Scones, featuring everyone's favorite flavor, brown sugar. Sorry, couldn't resist. Wow, my joke was so bad even your fireplace shut off. Let's fix that. Much cozier. Enjoying your cup of tea? Never mind how I know that. Let's just move on. Our first question this evening comes from a listener who was curious. Would there have been any rock and roll without Elvis? Now, this question may seem like a matter of opinion to most, but personally, I believe that yes, rock and roll would have existed without Elvis. However, it may have taken a bit longer to make its presence known. Sam Phillips, the man who started Sun Records, and ultimately was the first to record Elvis, had been searching for something as unifying and as novel as rock and roll for a very long time, before he finally found the exact combination of blues, country, and jazz that he had been looking for. There is a very interesting book about Sam Phillips called The Man Who Invented Rock and Roll by Peter Guralnick. You know, I can relate to Sam Phillips. He actually viewed music to be a very effective therapy, as he himself was known to occasionally suffer from panic attacks. So I guess you could say that I view Sam Phillips as the starting point of rock and roll, not Elvis. Many of the acts that Phillips was recording before even meeting Elvis were coming oh so close to that sound he had been looking for. But don't take my word for it. Listen for yourself. Check out a song called Rocket 88, which was recorded in 1951, several years before Elvis made his debut. And here's some trivia homework. Who wrote Rocket 88? What do you think about the subject? Do you think rock and roll would have come from some other source if Elvis hadn't popularized it? And if so, do you view another icon as being the starting point of rock and roll? Comment down below, and you just may get a shout out during our next show. So, who here remembers the first album they ever bought? See, I was born in 1985, so we still had a record player in our house when I was growing up. The first album that I had that was not an album of children's music or a Disney soundtrack was actually Billy Joel's Innocent Man album. Ah, the Piano Man. His music was just as big a part of my childhood as summer trips to visit my grandparents, who also lived on Long Island. The first album I ever bought On my own, though, well, that's a more complicated answer. My parents and I started collecting records together when I was about 9 years old. And we started with, of course, the Beatles. I know, cliché, right? A music-loving millennial collecting Beatles records. But there were plenty of other acts from the same era that I grew up listening to. One of my personal favorites was Paul Revere and the Raiders. I saw them live several times, and actually met Keith Allison on a cruise when I was 13. I met Mark Lindsay after a concert when I was 16. He kissed my hand, and I then proceeded to walk into the glass door on my way out of the meet and greet area. I am not known for my finesse. Hey, I heard that. Moving on. The next listener question. Was punk really a necessary step in the evolution of music? Or was it just noise and venting anger? I know several people who would count punk as their favorite genre, and each of them seem to have a different opinion on how and when it started, so I'm not going to focus on that. Rather, I'm going to focus on what punk stood for. You see, the punk that came about in the 70s was a response to the overproduction of rock and roll. Hence why there is such a strong emphasis on DIY in punk, and many bands were producing their own music. They wanted to create a more simplified form of hard rock that would bring rock and roll back to its basic roots. Don't believe me? Check out a song called Rumble by Link Ray. Originally released in 1958, it was viewed as so rebellious that it was actually banned for some time. The strangest part about that last statement, the song was an instrumental. Yes, an instrumental guitar solo viewed as so rebelliously visceral that those who already had decided that rock and roll was against all that was good tried to silence it. I'm not going to go into the history of every genre that led to the development of punk, or what part it played in genres to come on this show. That's a topic for another night. But if you're really curious, check out a documentary called Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. It will give you a taste of just how punk the roots of rock and roll were. Suffice to say, it was a very important step in the development of rock, and its seeds were planted long before the style was even called punk. I've already mentioned Link Ray and his 1958 recording. The 1970s saw the advent of groups like the Sex Pistols. But what about the 1960s? More specifically, the mid-1960s. What is now referred to as pre-punk or proto-punk, back then was referred to as garage rock. The Sonics, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, the Kinks, and yes, even the aforementioned Paul Revere and the Raiders were in that very category. What do you think? Is there a genre whose evolutionary story you find the most fascinating? Are there any unexpected musical links that you are interested in or have recently learned about? Share your thoughts with your fellow listeners this evening. Well, that's all we have time for this evening, folks. Join us next time as we take a look at the two heavy hitters from the British invasion. Yes, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. We'll be taking a look at some of their similarities, as well as some surprising differences. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get to the diner before they close. I have a hankering for some Fleetwood mac and cheese. Go your own way. Get it? WHEYM. Until next time, sailor.